today. I come here not as an expert on Balochistan. I'm less expert than any of the people that spoke here so far. So it was a very useful learning session for me. I've been rewriting my talk rapidly as these people talked. Selig Harrison, Robert Selly, the two gentlemen here. Uh, so I will try to make it relevant. I have been involved, and one of the reasons I feel I can contribute something here is because I was involved both in Afghanistan's struggle against Soviet occupation and victorious struggle in the end, and also Lithuania's struggle for independence, which was tied in with that struggle. There are four areas where I think I can make a contribution to your struggle for independence. One is to better understand America's own struggle to decide whether to oppose or support freedom. Second, the key role of your Punjabi and Iranian friends and how to manage that and overcome, how to better manage that crucial aspect to your struggle to independence. Third, understanding and a better insight into what I believe is going on in the Islamic world, whether that is Islamism is your threat or the systematic organization of hatred. Systematic organization, well, I'll get into that later. And then the role of your petroleum resources as probably your best weapon, not petroleum, your gas and petroleum resources as possibly your best weapon in your struggle for freedom. First, quickly, and I'll try to fly fast here. First, the U.S. role in the course of its liberty has not been a pretty one. When I was in Special Forces, I had an opportunity to study behind the scenes all the resistance movements that the CIA had supported before Afghanistan. It had supported 12. Lithuania, Ukraine, Albania, Hungary, Kurdistan twice, Poland, Tibet, Laos, Sumatra, Angola, Cuba. Each one of them was destroyed, abandoned, betrayed. 0 and 12. We have a very dysfunctional bureaucracy in this area. Even when I first was traveling in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen, the surface-to-air missiles that they received from the CIA were the SAM-7s. Now, the SAM-7s in the previous CIA operation in Angola, 26 SAM-7s had been fired at Soviet combat aircraft, and all 26 had misfired. There was a 100% failure rate. So for the next 3 years, they gave these missiles to the Mujahideen. It did have one very important military effect. The missiles left a smoke trail leading back to the gunner, so even though you could not knock down the aircraft, you could at least kill the gunner on the ground. And the Afghans nicknamed these missiles, they came in this case, they nicknamed it the coffin. In 1986, the Afghans, Gorbachev came to power in 1985, and the Afghans almost lost in 1986. What the Soviets had done is organized commando groups, just several hundred effective Spetsnaz commando groups in a very effective intelligence operation, and went hunting and killing one by one every effective Mujahideen group and wiped out approximately 40% of them until the Stinger finally arrived and turned the tide. Now, how that Stinger got decided, several issues were in play. The struggle for freedom in the United States, there's two sides of it. One is mostly concentrated inside the Beltway, where cozy deals with foreign dictatorships are made, where millions of dollars are spent. Right now, I just recently saw a document saying $18 million is being committed by the government of Sudan to impact the new administration more effectively. So this type of information is happening. This type of activity is happening inside the Beltway, but outside, when it came time for the Stingers, 10,000 Americans put letters into the White House demanding that John McMahon, the deputy CIA director, either deliver Stingers or resign, and he finally resigned on March 4th, 1986. As a matter of fact, that brings back a little memory of this room because in 1985, 24 years ago, it was in this room that we had a press conference at this podium right here calling for lie detector tests for the deputy director of the CIA. So there is American strength out there. Americans do believe in freedom. Let me give one or two more individuals before I go to the Americans at large. I recently had a chance to talk to Paul Wolfowitz, who some of you may know was essentially the man who planned and ran the Iraq War for the Department of Defense. And I asked him, looking back on the war, would you now look back to say that the Downing Plan would have been a better way to go than the invasion you guys had? And he said, absolutely. And what was the Downing Plan? The Downing Plan would have involved 2,000 Americans, only 2,000, not more troops, but only 2,000, about a $2 billion a year budget to support the resistance forces already fighting for their freedom in Iraq. But that was overruled by the government, and we have lost many thousands of lives and perhaps $1 trillion because the bureaucratic tendencies of our government went in the wrong direction. That potential is there. Just two recent observations outside the Beltway people. 2 weeks ago, I was at a conference of the Genocide Intervention Network. There were 900 activists there registered for that conference in the Hyatt Regency about a mile from here. Yet, it took only 30 effective activists to push the Afghan issue effectively on the ground, to mobilize everybody else. And however, inside the Beltway leadership does not want to make the State Department angry, does not want to confront them. So on the issue of Sudan, we still do not yet have an effective Sudan policy, even though we have 30 times more grassroots activists than it would take to win, already on the ground. In your particular case, to that I would like to add, a few years ago I read, before I ever heard of Balochistan, well, I was in Balochistan briefly, but was not aware much of it. There's a lot of, the largest growth of millionaires in the United States were Indians. How were the Indians doing it? Indian Americans. They were doing it by families taking over motels, and all those little abandoned motels around the country. And their whole family would work the motels, registration, cleanup, and everything, and all of a sudden, presto, you have $1 million family. And so that's what's possible in America. And this is a grassroots movement that who may share your commitment to plurality, human rights, and democracy in the South Asian continent. That's the struggle for this. Now for the one of the individuals I would also like to say, there are Americans who are deeply committed. This is Robert Selly and Sig Harrison. One of the persons who made made it possible for me to work on Afghanistan was a gentleman named David Dienstag, who's in the black shirt by the door there, who had a passion for the Afghans. Without his help in our office, we could not have succeeded in what we did. And he also is the one who got me here to support your cause of freedom. So he's an American who represents that spirit that we will take to win. A little bit on the Punjabis. For me, as a Lithuanian American, or as a Lithuanian, the Punjabis were the Russians were my Punjabis. They had killed hundreds of thousands of us. They had crushed our resistance movement, murdered them, deported many of my relatives to Siberia. Some of them died there. And yet I learned the Russian language, and I began to study their own desire for freedom. And I became, so when I started working on Afghanistan, I had already spoke some of the Russian. I had already commanded a Russian detachment in American Special Forces. So when the Russians were looking for an officer or someone to run a project to save the lives of Soviet soldiers deserting and defecting in Afghanistan, they hired me. There was an argument among the Russians whether to hire me or not. This is what I want you to, this is very key for your dealing with Punjabi stuff. You got to think creatively. There was an argument. And one of the Russians who was arguing against me said, listen, this guy's a Lithuanian nationalist. He hates the CIA, and we shouldn't hire him. But the Russian in charge of the project, Vladimir Bukovsky, overruled that objection, saying, I've spent 14 years in Soviet concentration camps and mental institutions, and I met many Lithuanians there, and I tell you, we will not free Russia without them. Can you be a factor in the freedom of Punjab against its oppression, the chokehold on its economy, on its freedoms? To the degree that you can be that instrument, you already have Punjabis, a handful of them among you. Sometimes you'll have to take the risk of trusting them and being open to them and working with them, so you are part of a broader, not an inter-ethnic conflict, but a part of a broader move for freedom in the South Asian continent. Next is the Islamist versus systematic organization of hatred. I have, by way of background, other than working for the Afghans, I worked also with the Bosnians and the Kosovars. I was invited by American Muslims to there. I've worked frequently with members of the Ikhwan, and with the Afghan Mujahideen, for those of you who know, the one who helped me the most with rescuing Soviet soldiers and deserters and defectors was Hekmatyar Gulbuddin, partially sponsored by our friends of the ISI. And Hekmatyar explained to me one time in a conversation, we face two enemies, we being the Afghan Mujahideen, the Afghan people. We face one from the north coming at us with weapons, tanks, gunships. We know how to defeat that type of we Afghans know what it takes to defeat such an enemy. But the other enemy comes at us with corruption, depravity, pornography from the west, and this we are really fear, and we do not know how we will stand against it. So there, from my perception, in working with the Sudanese right now, where in the Maghreb, in the Sahara area, where there is a borderline between Christian and animus in the south, Muslims in the north, Al-Qaeda has put a lot of resources trying to stoke intersectarian hatreds there. Places like Algeria and Mali, Niger, Somalia. Somalia is the ruling elite there are close to Al-Qaeda. And they have tried to organize hatred there. Yet the people, they've lost about 3 countries in the last year, roughly. They've lost in Morocco, they've lost in Algeria. They're still hanging on in northern Mali and northern Niger. But the role of Al-Qaeda is being diminished there because people are revolted against their mass murder and their systematic organization of hatred. And these are Muslim people, and Muslim people who are turning against them. And many of them are devout Muslim people, not necessarily secular. So people who are devout Muslims are not necessarily, sometimes when we use the term Islamist, we can group more than half of Muslims that I've known are devout. And we don't want to let the Al-Qaeda and those who organize the systematic organization of hatred to group up their forces. Historically, the systematic organization of hatred is something new thanks to mass technology. It's the first effective pioneer of it was Hitler, systematic organization hatred against the Jews. Then the communists, communists preceded them, but developed it under Stalin, of class hatred. The Serb ultranationalists, who use it to destroy the Bosnians, the Kosovars, and finally, the systematic organization of hatred within the Arab world, essentially, but it has spread beyond the Arab into Pakistan, into some Taliban elements. I remember when I was in prison in Pakistan. I've been 78 days as a guest of Special Branch. One of the Pakistani officers bragged to me of a secret plan to destroy Israel. And I said, gee, tell me all about it. And he wouldn't do it, but I assume it was the nuclear program being subsidized by Gaddafi at that time. What is systematic organization of hatred? The collating of various economic, nationalistic, greed, fears, organizing it effectively at a large scale so people want to engage, are willing to group up and engage in mass murder of societies, of populations, and so forth. Part of the systematic organization of hatred, for example, in Sudan, one of the interests, because many people believe Darfur is sitting on a lake of oil. So by killing all the Darfuris, they've killed 400,000. They've driven another 2 million out of their homes. They've also killed 2 million people in the south. Just a small group, the Nile River Arabs, small made up of 3 tribes. They have systematically organized hatred, not just sectarian, but also the greed for that oil, petroleum. And that brings me to the final point, which I think is, I hope I don't run over here, because I hope that this will be the best 2 or 3 minutes, Akmar, if you can hang with me. As I was working on Sudan, a gentleman named Coyle challenged me, what is Sudan going to do after it's free, if we help them go free? So I said, well, they'll be free to ruin their country like everybody else. And he said, no, that's not good enough. All right, but he was volunteering his energy. So I said, okay, I will look into it for you. I will try to come up with some answer that you like. As you have probably heard, for most countries who have large oil and gas resources, that is a curse. It creates a corrupt, lethal bureaucracy, or a bunch of crazy Wahhabis, in the case of Saudi Arabia, who do destructive things with those resources. So I went looking through the various oil-producing countries or areas which do it the best. And the 2 best I found were Norway and Alaska. The one I had the chance to study the most was Alaska. I see some people marking that down. If you want to study the Alaska model, there's a book on it, The Alaska Solution by Walter Hickel, Hickel. By the way, he was, just to time in, he was a mentor of Sarah Palin. But one of the people who have publicly advocated the Alaska solution in the case of Iraq's hydrocarbons was Hillary Clinton when she was a senator. She understood this. She saw what they were doing and saw the vision of it. What that meant was anybody in Alaska can go online and find out what they're going to get, how much money they're going to get this year based on the production levels and the prices of oil. It's so transparent, and it's taken all that money away from the government agencies, which use it for their nephews or for the Wahhabis or whoever, and at the same time give it to the people. But Norway had something similar. The interesting thing about the Alaskan case is, even though they gave it cash to people, roughly on a good year it's $4,000, on a slow year it's $2,000 a year per person. They give the cash to people, but in the case of the outlying villages where the Indians or Eskimos, the tribal people live, for them it was particularly useful because they were able to rebuild their educational infrastructure, their teachers, which led to a real recovery of Indian culture in those areas, which adapted that properly to themselves. I thought that would be that to me looked appealing, both whether it's for Sudan or for you. Now, there's something when there's big oil or gas potential laying around, it becomes a bone of contention. So that's why you have different groups in Sudan. Each one dreams that they will somehow control that oil versus the other people. So a transparent way for if the people, the grassroots, and you can now network via the internet much more than people could 5-10 years ago. If people could network to all support a transparent thing that will channel the future oil and gas profits of your country to the students, the school kids of your country. Why the school kids? Well, there's according to Rodney Stark, who wrote a book called Victory of Reason, which deals with the success of Western civilization, there's a couple of pages on it that says every study that has been conducted under the most effective way to spend government money is to spend it on the education of your children. And that's something that's proven, and that's something that every Balochi, every Sudanese, or anyone else stuck in a petrolist dominant country can unite with. That way, that locks out. That's something everybody can unite with. Even if there's somebody dreaming about being able to grab a big chunk of the oil or the gas for themselves, his own people who have children and nephews and nieces will want such a vision to be true for their children. So it's something that can help you unify, make it transparent. And it's something, by the way, that the Iranian people would find it very much in their interest, that type of an approach to share with you. And if you have an Iranian Baloch Indian pipeline, or maybe Sindh in there, Iranian Baloch Sindh pipeline, then you have, because one of the big problems with oil, with the Indian production of energy, 53% of the energy is produced by coal, which is the major source of pollution, as you know. You can reduce from coal, by switching the energy from coal to gas, you can reduce the pollution by, if I remember the figure, it's roughly 80%. 80%. It's a big step forward in making India's cities breathable again by having a good, secure source of gas, which could be the Iranian Indian pipeline, to which the Baloch could add their own export. So that would make a reasonable, comprehensive energy solution from which the children of Balochistan could benefit, and something and could form the basis of unity. Well, good luck on your struggle for freedom. Good luck on the rest of your conference. Thank you for your time.